The black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima clung to everything like a living thing, gritty and sulfurous. As the landing craft ramp dropped on February 19, 1945, Arnold "Arnie" Cole, 19 years old and already feeling the weight of his new role, stepped into the chaos with the first waves of the 5th Marine Division. The island was only 8 square miles of rock and ash, but it might as well have been the gateway to hell itself, 660 miles south of Tokyo, a fortress the Japanese had turned into a honeycomb of tunnels, bunkers, and machine gun nests. Operation Detachment had begun, and Arnie, a Navy hospital corpsman attached to the 26th Marine Regiment, carried more than his medical bag. He carried the lives of the men around him. Born on October 9, 1924, to homesteaders in the windswept plains of Beulah, North Dakota, Arnie had known hard ground and harder winters before his family drifted west to Wyoming and then Billings, Montana. Pearl Harbor had shattered the quiet of his 17th year. His father signed the consent papers without hesitation, and Arnie traded the open skies for the rigid discipline of Navy basic training and specialized corpsman school. They taught him to staunch bleeding, splint bones, and administer morphine under fire. What they couldn't teach was how it would feel when the men you patched up called you Doc like a prayer. Assigned to a company in the 26th Marines, Arnie quickly learned the sacred, deadly truth of his position. Corpsmen were issued a .45 pistol for self-defense, but many, including Arnie, scavenged an M1 Garand rifle when the shooting started. The Japanese knew exactly what a corpsman meant. Take him out, and 25 Marines lost their lifeline. Arnie had heard the stories and seen the proof early. On the beach that first morning, as artillery shells walked across the sand and mortar rounds sent black plumes skyward, he ripped open his bag and went to work. Bullets cracked overhead. Men screamed for their mothers. He knelt beside a Marine whose leg ended in a ragged stump, tied a tourniquet with steady hands, and injected morphine while whispering, "You're going home, buddy. Stay with me." He discarded the Red Cross brassard and helmet markings that made him a target. Into a plain utility bag went his bandages, sulfa powder, and plasma. He kept the Garand close. "I do what the hell has to be done," he would later say. And on Iwo Jima, that meant everything from dragging wounded men behind shattered Amtraks to firing, back when the enemy surged from hidden spider holes. The push inland was a nightmare of incremental horror. From the southern beaches near Mount Suribachi, the Marines clawed north toward the airfields that sat like prizes in the island's middle. Arnie moved with them, step by bloody step. The terrain offered no cover, just loose ash that gave way under boots, craters filled with seawater, and the constant reek of sulfur that burned the throat and eyes. Japanese defenders, burrowed deep, waited until the Americans were almost on top of them before opening fire. Flamethrowers roared in reply, turning pillboxes into ovens. The screams of burning men mixed with the chatter of machine guns. Days blurred into one long roar. Arnie treated shrapnel wounds that peppered bodies like buckshot, sucking chest injuries that whistled with every breath, and the quiet shock of men whose eyes had gone vacant from too much death. He lost count of the plasma bottles he spiked, the morphine syringes he snapped. The Marines treated him like royalty, gave him their rations, shielded him with their bodies when snipers hunted. When they get one corpsman, Arnie knew, they get 25 Marines. He felt the weight of that equation every time he ran toward the sound of fresh gunfire. By the 33rd day, the battle had ground northward past the airfields into the rugged northern ridges. The 26th Marines had paid in blood for every yard. Arnie had already seen 3 full companies of men he couldn't save, faces he had come to know, voices that had joked with him in the lulls. On March 24, 1945, the crack of a Japanese Arisaka rifle cut through the din. The bullet struck him square in the chest, punching through and out his back in a spray of red. Pain exploded white-hot. Arnie staggered, then dropped to one knee. Blood bubbled at his lips. He knew instantly what it was, a sucking chest wound. Air rushed into the cavity with every desperate inhale, collapsing the lung, threatening to drown him from the inside. Training took over before panic could. He reached behind himself, fingers slick with blood, and found a jagged piece of volcanic rock on the ground. Without hesitation, he jammed it into the exit wound in his back, sealing it as best he could. Then he rolled onto it, pressing his weight down to keep the makeshift plug in place. With his free hand, he clamped the entry hole on his chest, trying to stop the fatal hiss of escaping air. "I'm a company aid man," he gasped to the Marines who rushed to him. "Do what the hell has to be done." They didn't hesitate. Strong hands lifted him into a poncho, turning it into an improvised stretcher. 4 Marines carried him rearward at a crouching run, dodging fire, cursing the terrain that tried to swallow their boots. Arnie stared up at the smoke-choked sky, each jolt sending fresh agony through his ruined chest. He was 20 years old, and he could feel his life leaking away with every heartbeat. At the battalion aid station, the corpsmen and doctors worked fast, but the island's casualties overwhelmed every station. Arnie was stabilized just enough to be moved again, this time to the beach and onto a waiting vessel. They transferred him to the USS Queens, a converted transport pressed into service as a floating hospital. The ship was already packed with the broken bodies of Iwo Jima. Surgeons fought to save what they could, but Arnie's condition worsened. Severe bleeding and massive blood loss left him drifting in and out of consciousness. His right lung was shredded. The damage to his chest wall was catastrophic. The doctors made a grim calculation. With limited resources and too many critical cases, some men were tagged for burial at sea. Arnie and another Marine, both appearing beyond saving, received green tags marking them as deceased. They were rolled on gurneys into the ship's morgue area, bodies laid among the silent dead. The Queen steamed away from the island, heading towards safer waters. That was when fate twisted. Deep in the dim refrigerated hold, surrounded by the draped forms of men who would never see home again, Arnie groaned. It was a low, involuntary sound, perhaps a final protest from a body that refused to quit. One of the orderlies heard it. He froze, then rushed over, checking for a pulse. There it was, faint, thready, but present. Shouts echoed through the compartment. Hands yanked the gurney back into the light. Doctors swarmed. They tore away the green tag and fought for his life with every tool they had left. The twist of fate had come at the last possible moment. Had that groan gone unheard, Arnie Cole would have been consigned to the Pacific depths with the others. Instead, he was rushed into emergency surgery. They removed his destroyed right lung, 8 shattered ribs, and part of his shoulder girdle. The operation was brutal, but he survived it, barely. From the Queens, he was evacuated to Guam for further stabilization. The island hospital became his world for a time, white sheets against the tropical heat, the constant murmur of medical staff, the distant thunder of aircraft ferrying more wounded. From Guam he went to Pearl Harbor, and finally to the Naval Hospital in San Diego. 2 full years of recovery stretched ahead: surgeries, physical therapy, nights when the pain made him wish the rock had failed to seal the wound. He walked again, learned to breathe with one lung, and carried the scars that mapped every terrible second on Iwo Jima. Arnie never forgot the men he couldn't reach. "I lost 3 companies of men," he would say quietly in later years. The phrase carried the weight of every Marine whose final moments he had witnessed, every name he could no longer recall but whose faces haunted the quiet hours. Yet he also remembered the ones he had saved, the Marine whose leg he saved from amputation, the kid from Brooklyn whose sucking chest wound he sealed with a field dressing and prayer, the sergeant who squeezed his hand and whispered thanks before being evacuated. The Battle of Iwo Jima raged on without him. On D+4, Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal stood on the island and watched 6 Marines raise the American flag atop Mount Suribachi. Joe Rosenthal's camera captured the moment, an image that would burn itself into the nation's memory. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz later said of the men who fought there, "Among the Americans serving on Iwo Island, uncommon valor was a common virtue. 27 medals of honor were awarded, 14 of them posthumous. The island was declared secure on March 26th, but mopping up operations continued for weeks. The cost was staggering, nearly 7,000 American dead and more than 19,000 wounded. Japanese losses were almost total. Arnie Cole's war ended on that poncho carry across the ash. He spent the rest of his life carrying the memory of Sulphur Island in his altered breath and the ache in his reconstructed shoulder. The rock he had jammed into his own back became a private talisman of survival, a gritty reminder that sometimes the difference between life and death is as small and hard as a piece of volcanic stone and the stubborn refusal to stop fighting. Years later, in a quiet interview with the National Museum of the Pacific War, Arnie spoke with the calm perspective of a man who had stared into the abyss and walked away. He described discarding his corpsman markings, picking up the rifle, and doing whatever had to be done. He recounted the Arisaka bullet, the rock, the poncho, and the morgue. His voice never wavered when he said the hospital corpsman was treated like a king by the Marines because they knew what he represented: hope, continuity, someone who would run through fire to keep them alive. He lived on, one of the fortunate few whose story included not one but two miracles: the rock that bought him precious minutes, and the groan in the morgue that brought him back from the edge of eternity. The Pacific War claimed countless young men on Iwo Jima, but Arnold Cole's twist of fate ensured that his chapter did not end in a green-tagged gurney or a quiet splash into the sea. It continued scarred, breathing differently, forever marked by the island that tried and failed to claim him. In the end, the sulfur-tainted winds of Iwo Jima carried away the smoke of battle, but they could not erase the courage of ordinary men like Arnie Cole. A kid from the homesteads of North Dakota had crossed an ocean, patched the broken bodies of warriors, and survived when death had already written his name. He had done what the hell had to be done, and in doing so, he became part of the uncommon valor that defined a generation.